My true story from Louisiana. At family dinner, my granddaughter whispered, "It hurts when I sit." They laughed it off, but her crayon sketches told me what no one dared say until the police got involved. At family dinner, my granddaughter whispered, "It hurts when I sit." No one heard her but me. She leaned close, her little lips brushing the side of my arm, her voice thinner than a thread. Her plate was mostly untouched. Mashed potatoes, half a chicken tender, a crescent roll, all of it cold. Her legs shifted constantly beneath the table, and her knees pressed together like she was trying to hold herself inside. I looked down at her, her brown eyes big, still, and too quiet. She searched my face, as if asking a question she could not form. That moment felt like a siren that only I could hear. I turned to the table and repeated gently, "Ellie says it hurts when she sits." The entire table erupted in laughter. Elisa, sitting across from me in a low-cut floral dress that did not belong in a dining room full of children, let out a loud cackle. "Oh, please," she said, waving her wine glass. "She's probably constipated or acting like grandma again, dramatic." The others chuckled in agreement. Even my ex-in-law, Brian, gave a weak smile before glancing at his phone. Ellie's face went pale. She looked down at her plate, her lips sealed shut. I laid my hand gently on her back, but her shoulders stiffened under my palm. "She said she's in pain," I said again, firmer now, locking eyes with Alyssa. Alyssa rolled her eyes. "Margaret, for the love of God, not everything is a medical emergency. The kids are probably being fussy. It's what 6-year-olds do. They whine. They exaggerate. Maybe she bumped her tailbone jumping off the couch. Or maybe you filled her head with spooky stories again." "She's not pretending," I said. Brian cleared his throat and muttered, "Let's just get through dinner, okay?" "Right," Alyssa said loudly again, like it was a punchline. "Let's get through dinner without another one of Margaret's dramatic detours. Honestly, you'd think we invited a ghost to eat with us. You hardly ever talk unless you're trying to turn dessert into a crime scene." I stayed quiet. I was used to the jokes, the jabs, the sideways glances, the way they treated me like a leftover relic from a time they wished had never existed. I lived in the basement of the house I once owned. I ate at the table I once polished with beeswax and lemon oil. I cooked in the kitchen that still had my initials carved into the back of a pantry door, but I was no longer part of the family. I was tolerated, fed, kept alive, and only Ellie noticed. Only Ellie ever came down the basement stairs after dinner, barefoot in her pajamas, clutching her little sketch pad and asking if I'd read to her. Only Ellie sat beside me during my early morning tea, her head resting on my thigh as I knitted. Only Ellie whispered when no one else was listening. That night, after the laughter died down and dessert was passed around like nothing had happened, I watched her from across the living room. She didn't sit on the couch. She knelt on the rug, her coloring book open but untouched. Her tiny fingers traced the edges of the crayons without choosing one. I could see it in the way her shoulders hunched, in the way her feet curled under her, in the way she flinched slightly when Logan, Elise's boyfriend, the man who had no blood in this family but moved through the house like he owned it, reached over her head to grab the remote. My skin prickled. "Ellie," I said softly from my corner, "do you want to come downstairs with me later? We can read the one with the fireflies." She didn't look up, just nodded once. That night, under the yellow basement lamp, she curled up on the couch beside me, her face pressed into my side. I didn't read the book. I just held her. Eventually, she dozed off, but not before whispering one more thing. She said, "If I tell, I'll get taken away, just like you almost were." My hand froze mid-stroke in her hair. "Who said that, baby?" But she was already pretending to sleep. I sat there in the quiet of the basement, the hum of the old furnace filling the silence, and I felt it. The kind of dread that only a grandmother knows, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you grip the arm of the chair a little tighter. I had suspected something was wrong for months. The way Ellie avoided eye contact, the sudden tantrums, the nighttime bedwetting that Alyssa mocked in front of friends, the way Logan lingered too long in doorways. And now this. I stared at the little girl asleep against my ribs. so small, so scared. And I knew what I had to do, because no one else would. And I had already buried one daughter. I wasn't going to lose the only piece of her I had left. We should have left her in that hospice. She's just waiting to die louder. Elisa said it loud enough for everyone to hear, but she never looked at me when she spoke. She never did. She always said these things with her wine glass raised or her eyes glued to a casserole dish, like her cruelty was just another part of the decor, something you couldn't remove without disturbing the color scheme. That night, she said it while I was washing the dishes. I stood at the sink, my hands deep in the soapy water, in the same kitchen where I had once baked birthday cakes and burned Thanksgiving turkeys with laughter in my chest. And now I stood silent while my bones ached, and Elise's voice slithered over the tiled floor like poison. "She's just waiting to die louder," she repeated, pulling a linen napkin from the table. "Honestly, why are we still keeping her here? For what? Nostalgia." Nobody responded, because nobody ever did. This was my house. My name was the first one etched on the deed nearly 30 years ago. Harold and I bought it before the market crash, when we still believed in futures. After his death, I kept it running. After my daughter Janine passed away in that wreck, I turned the guest room into Ellie's nursery. It was me who painted the walls yellow, me who held that child every night while Alyssa disappeared for grief weekends, and Brian drowned in overtime and beer. When I moved into the basement, it was supposed to be temporary just until they got their lives together, just until things settled. They never did. They took over piece by piece. The upstairs bathroom became off-limits. My furniture was pushed into the garage. Elisa replaced the photos of Janine with pictures of her own brunches and backyard parties. And I, the woman who scrubbed that floor on her knees for decades, became an afterthought, a line item on the grocery list, the thing they had to deal with on holidays. Elisa had no patience for me. She saw me as a drain, a holdover, a burden that came with the kid she never really wanted. I was tolerated only because I cooked, folded laundry, and picked Ellie up from school when no one else could, and even then I was called grandma in the same tone one might use for a roach in the hallway. Every time I tried to talk to Ellie, to really talk, Elisa stepped in like a warden. "She's fine," she snapped once when I asked why Ellie flinched when Logan walked in the room. "She's just shy," she barked another time when I brought up the sudden nightmares, the drawings filled with locked rooms and screaming faces. "Don't project your trauma onto my kid," she hissed last week. "Just because you couldn't save your daughter doesn't mean you get to play detective." Now, I remember standing at the bottom of the stairs that night, hearing Ellie crying upstairs. Alyssa had locked the door. I wasn't allowed up after 9. I wasn't allowed to interfere, but I knew those cries. I knew that sound like I knew my own breath. It was the same cry Janine used to make when she came home with bruises from a boy who said he loved her hard. It was the same pitch, the same choked sob. And no matter how many times Alyssa told me it was just a phase, I felt the truth running cold through my veins. They said I was old, delusional. They said I imagined things, that my mind was slipping, and soon I'd be better off in care. But I wasn't confused. I wasn't broken. I was watching and remembering and praying to a God I wasn't sure still listened. At dinner the next day, Ellie barely spoke. She picked at her food. When Logan brushed past her, she froze, eyes wide. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. I reached over and gently placed my hand on hers. She didn't flinch from me. "Ellie," I said quietly, "do you want to draw something after dinner?" She nodded slowly, the only word she said all evening. Later that night, in the basement, she handed me a sketch. Crayons, thick lines, the color black smeared across most of the paper. In the center, a small girl with no mouth. Beside her, a man drawn with no face at all. I didn't ask. I just hugged her, and I knew what I had to do, because I had already lost one daughter, and I wasn't about to let them take her child. 2. The drawings began quietly. At first, they looked like any child's work. Uneven lines, stick figures, sunflowers with too many petals. But then the light disappeared. Ellie stopped drawing butterflies and rainbows. Instead, she drew a house with no windows. Black crayons smeared across every wall. No light, no doors, a roof that seemed to press down like it was crushing everything inside. One morning, I found a picture left under her pillow. It showed a little girl, clearly Ellie, curled into a corner. Beside her was a man, tall, featureless, his face completely blank. His hands were long, too long, drawn in angry red strokes, reaching for her. She had written above it in her wobbly first-grade handwriting, "Don't tell. No one believes Grandma." My hands trembled holding that piece of paper. I knew what she meant, not just what she drew, but what she had been trying to say from the beginning. And I knew that someone in that house had made her believe that silence was safer than truth. I folded the paper gently and hid it between the pages of my old recipe book. Then I started watching more closely. The next night, she brought me another drawing. It showed the same man, faceless again, but this time holding the hand of the little girl. She had drawn tears on her own face. Big blue cartoonish teardrops, and underneath written in smaller jagged letters, he said, "Be quiet or I'll go away, too." I held her close that night, stroking her hair, whispering nothing but gentle things like, "You're safe with Grandma," and "You're not alone." The next day, I confronted Alyssa. I waited until the house was quiet, until Logan had gone out for beer and Brian was buried in the garage with his tools. I took the first drawing, the windowless house, and slid it across the counter. "She's crying for help," I said. Lissa glanced at it, blinked once, and then without hesitation, tore it in half. "She draws weird because you fill her head with ghosts and guilt," she snapped. "You've been whispering your little sob stories about your dead daughter and your haunted life, and now she thinks drama equals attention." "She's scared," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's imaginative," she shot back. "And you're projecting." Then she leaned forward, voice lowering to a hiss. "Try this again, and I'll make sure you're not allowed to speak to her at all." I said nothing. I just walked away. That night in the basement, Ellie sat on the couch with her sketch pad in her lap, her crayons scattered like fallen leaves. She didn't look at me when she whispered. He said, "If I tell, I'll be taken away, just like you almost were." My throat tightened. Taken away. I thought back to the conversation Lisa once had on the phone, the one I overheard by accident about getting the old lady declared incompetent, and looking into full custody and property transfer. They tried it before, and now they were trying it with her. I wrapped my arms around her, pulled her into my chest, and whispered, "You don't have to tell anyone else. Just tell me. I'll believe you always." She didn't reply. She just nodded, and then carefully she slid another drawing into my hands. This one showed two figures, a child and an old woman. They were standing in the corner of a dark room. The window was gone, but this time there was a light bulb above them, small, flickering, barely enough, and between them one word scrolled in pink. "Help." I knew no one would believe me. Not Alyssa, not Brian, not anyone in that house who had learned to treat my presence like expired milk, tolerated, ignored, and eventually thrown out. If I came forward with just Ellie's drawings and a trembling voice, they would say I was confused, paranoid, senile. So I began quietly. That night, after Ellie fell asleep in the basement next to me, her thumb still tucked beneath her chin, I carefully unzipped the back of her favorite stuffed giraffe and inserted a tiny voice recorder I had ordered months ago when I first suspected something wasn't right in that house. I had never used it, but now I clicked it on. Each night, I spoke to her gently, never pushing, just guiding her like I used to guide Janine across creeks in springtime. Slow, patient steps. I would tell her a story, then pause, then ask something like, "Does the man in your drawing still visit your room?" She would nod or sometimes whisper, "Only when Mommy is asleep." One night, while stroking the giraffe's ear, she whispered, "He has no face because he says I can't draw it." Another night, she said he locks the door from the inside. I never flinched. I couldn't afford to. Eventually, she said it aloud. "Logan is the shadow." I knew, of course. I had suspected for weeks. The way Ellie curled away from him in passing, the way she never wanted to be alone in a room when he was nearby. But hearing her say it in that small voice felt like someone had shoved ice into my chest. I kept recording. Every night, I gathered pieces, names, times, phrases. I never asked her to say more than she wanted, but I made sure her voice was always gently guided toward what mattered: the truth. Then I called Barnes. He was my old attorney, the one who had helped Harold and me set up the trust for our home, the one who had quietly advised me years ago during my first legal battle over custody, the one I lost. He hadn't heard from me in a decade. But when I called, he picked up after the second ring. "Margaret." "Yes," I said. "I need you for Ellie." Within a day, we met in his office downtown. I brought him a USB drive labeled in handwriting I hoped wouldn't tremble too much: "Recordings, Ellie." I watched as he plugged it in and listened. He didn't speak for a long time. His face went stone still. When the clip ended, the one where Ellie whispered, "If I tell, I'll disappear like Grandma almost did," he finally looked up. "We can build a case," he said, "but we need more. I need to know who he really is." I told him Logan, Elise's boyfriend. Barnes nodded. "I'll find out what he uncovered."
Chilled.
Even me. Logan Mitchell, 37. No fixed employment. Moved state to state. Had lived with 3 different women in the last 8 years. 2 of them had daughters under 10. One filed a report in Texas: child sexual abuse. Case dropped due to lack of evidence and a withdrawing witness. No convictions, no trial. The report included a detail: the girl had drawn the man without a face. Barnes stared at me across his polished desk. "You realize," he said slowly, "that this may go beyond him. If Alyssa knew and looked the other way, or worse, protected him." "She will," I said. "She already is." I showed him Ellie's most recent drawing: a faceless man with long arms standing behind a girl in bed, and next to him, a woman drawn with her back turned. She had labeled the woman Mom. Barnes closed the folder. "We build the case quietly, slowly. We do not confront. We collect. We protect Ellie, and we make sure they never see it coming." I nodded. My fingers clenched the handle of my purse like it was the only solid thing I could trust. That night, I tucked Ellie in. She asked me to sing to her, something I hadn't done since Janine was small.
I sang softly.
She closed her eyes, then opened them again. "Grandma?" "Yes, baby." When he hurts me, it makes me forget how to draw anything happy. I swallowed. My voice cracked, but I said, "You don't have to draw happy right now. You just have to keep drawing, and I'll keep listening, and I'll keep recording, and I'll keep fighting," because now I knew the man with no face had a name, and I would not let him stay in the shadows any longer. The moment I saw Elisa standing in the basement doorway holding a printout of my email to Barnes, I knew the clock had stopped ticking. There was no more time for gathering evidence, no more quiet. The storm had arrived. "You think you're clever, you shriveled little parasite," she hissed, her voice sharp with a kind of glee. "Spying? Sending your little bedtime fairy tales to a lawyer." Behind her, Logan appeared. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His eyes were flat, cold. He stepped down into the basement, the wooden stairs creaking under his weight. I backed away, one hand still gripping Ellie's drawing. I hadn't had the chance to hide. "I know what you're doing," I said, my voice steady despite the thudding in my chest. "You're done." She told me everything. And she's not the only one. "You're not going to talk to anyone ever again," Logan said. And then it happened so fast. I didn't even see the swing. The back of his hand caught my temple. I collapsed against the concrete floor, pain exploding behind my eyes. My ribs hit the edge of the metal daybed as I fell. They didn't drag me upstairs. No, they did worse. They took my phone, my purse, my glasses. They shoved me back into the small storage closet in the basement and slammed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide shut from outside. Alyssa laughed. "You want to play detective, Grandma? Fine. You can rot in your little bat cave until we figure out what to do with you." I pounded the door, but it was solid wood. No windows, no light, just the smell of mildew and paint thinner. Ellie screamed upstairs. "Where's Grandma? What did you do?" And then Elise's voice, sharp and cruel, replied, "Cry one more time, and you'll rot where she is." I went still. For hours, I lay in the dark. My head throbbed. My arms stung from where I landed. I felt my way to a stack of rusted paint cans, then to an old tin lunchbox Janine had once used in 5th grade. Inside was nothing but old screws and a piece of bent wire. I pulled the lid off, and then I had an idea. I took the sharpest edge of the broken tin and sliced a line across the inside of my forearm. It wasn't deep, but it was enough. With trembling fingers, I dipped my hand in the blood and began to write on the gray concrete wall. Barnes, help Ellie. Each letter shook, my vision blurred, but I kept writing. If anyone ever came down here, if Ellie escaped, or if a cop or a social worker found their way inside, I wanted them to know this wasn't a forgettable disappearance. This was planned. This was real. The next morning, I heard Elsa upstairs talking loudly on the phone. Yeah, we leave Thursday morning. Why Kiki? Thank God. This place is cursed. Hawaii. They were going on vacation. They were planning to leave me locked in this room like old Christmas decorations, like garbage. I knew if they got on that plane and came back, I'd be gone, moved, institutionalized, or worse, dead and buried in the garden with a newer box on top. My time had run out. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Ellie saved me, and she did it the only way she knew how, with crayons and paper. 3 days after I was locked in the basement, Alyssa took Ellie to school like everything was fine. Ellie, quiet and hollow-eyed, slipped a folded piece of construction paper into the side pocket of her backpack. She didn't say a word to her teacher that morning. But during art class, while everyone else painted pumpkins, she quietly walked to Miss Dye's desk and handed her the paper. Then she returned to her seat and stared at the wall. Miss Daly didn't open it right away. She was busy passing out brushes. But something about Ellie's face, the frozen sadness, the silence, tugged at her. So she unfolded the paper. It was a house with stairs, a girl drawn in a dark box beneath the stairs. Above the box was the word Grandma. Beside the girl, in a bigger room, another figure, no eyes, no mouth, holding the girl's hand. Next to that, one more word, he hurts. And in the top right corner, drawn in red crayon, was the word help. Miss Daly didn't hesitate. She locked the classroom door, called the school counselor, and by noon, Child Protective Services and a sheriff's deputy were in her office. Ellie was pulled out of class gently and asked to repeat what she had drawn. She whispered just 5 words. He keeps her in there. Then she began to cry. By 4 p.m., Barnes had the call. And by midnight, while Alyssa and Logan were halfway to Hawaii, sipping airport cocktails and bragging about how peaceful their house would be without that old hag, the police were outside that very house with a locksmith and a warrant. They found me curled up in the corner of the storage room, barely conscious. They found Ellie's sketchbooks hidden in my locked recipe tin. They found Ellie's recordings. I had backed them up and left them in my coat pocket just in case. And in Logan's computer, tucked away in a folder labeled taxes_2017, they found the final nail in the coffin, hidden camera footage. Dozens of short videos, dated and time-stamped, taken through a peephole drilled into the bathroom tile. Videos of Ellie alone, undressed, terrified. The house became a crime scene overnight. I was taken to the hospital. Ellie too. Her medical exam confirmed what she had drawn, and worse. Barnes called me the next morning. They're not getting on that return flight, he said. The arrest warrants will be waiting at the gate. I stared out the hospital window, fingers still bandaged, throat raw from dehydration and bruises. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something crack open in my chest. Not grief, not rage, relief. Ellie had spoken, and someone had listened. The courtroom smelled like old paper and cold metal, the kind of place where you feel the weight of other people's pain before you ever take your seat. I walked in with a cane, my left leg still bruised from where Logan had kicked it in the basement. My arm was bandaged where the skin had split, writing Barnes in blood on concrete, but I walked in tall. Barnes stood beside me, steady and unshaken. In front of us sat the 2 people who had nearly destroyed Ellie's life and mine. Elisa was in a pale blazer too bright for the room, her face already smeared with tears, her hands trembling dramatically in her lap. Her lawyer, a young man with shiny hair and no soul in his eyes, was whispering something to her that made her nod violently. Across from her sat Logan, in an orange jumpsuit, shackled, smirking. He hadn't spoken a word since his arrest. Not when they caught him at the gate. Not when the charges were read. Not when they brought up the files on his computer. But I knew that smirk. It was the same one he gave Ellie when she stepped out of line. The same one he wore when he walked into rooms without knocking.
It was his mask.
The judge asked me to approach the stand. I stood slowly. Barnes helped me to the front and I placed the file in front of me. Inside were printed transcripts of the audio. Ellie had whispered into her stuffed giraffe, color copies of her drawings, the medical report, the CPS testimony, and the signed affidavit from the teacher who had opened that folded red crayon cry for help. "I'd like to speak," I said to the court. The judge nodded. "My name is Margaret N. Cole. I am 76 years old. I was the legal owner of the house in which these crimes took place. I was also the only one in that house who listened when a little girl said she was in pain." I turned to face Alyssa. "You laughed when she whispered," I said, but I remembered every word. A hush fell over the room. Alyssa sobbed harder. Her lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we request that this statement be dismissed as emotionally manipulative. Miss Cole has documented memory lapses, and we believe her capacity to testify may be compromised." Barnes stood. "We have no record of any such diagnosis, and the evidence, much of which Ms. Cole personally preserved at great personal risk, supports every claim." The judge looked at me. "Please continue." I looked at Logan. "She drew you without a face because she was too scared to give you one. But now the world has seen it. The videos you hid, the hands you used, the fear you fed on. You thought no one would believe her. You counted on it." Then I held up one of Ellie's drawings, the one with the word "help" scribbled in red. She couldn't scream, so she drew, and I screamed for her. That afternoon, the court sentenced Logan Mitchell to life in prison without the possibility of parole for aggravated sexual abuse of a minor, child exploitation, and unlawful surveillance. Alyssa for willful endangerment, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and destruction of evidence received the same. As the bailiffs let her out, she turned to me one last time, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "She was lying," she cried. "You filled her head. You turned her against me." I looked her in the eye. "No," I said. "You did that all by yourself." The judge ruled that Ellie would be removed from all contact with both sides of the family that failed her. And then he looked at me. "Miss Cole, would you be willing to become her permanent guardian?" I nodded. "I already am." The first morning in Oregon smelled like cinnamon and rain. Ellie sat on the stool by the window, her feet swinging in her flowered tights, drawing with crayons as the scent of fresh bread filled our little shop. The sign out front read, "Warm crumbs carved by hand and painted in soft gold." I had used the last of Harold's savings and the court restitution money to build it, not for profit, but for peace. I had dreamed of a place like this once, a kitchen that stayed warm, where no one shouted, and the only things rising were bread and laughter. I just never thought I'd reach it with bruises still fading from my arms and a child in my care who had seen more cruelty, by 6 than most do in a lifetime. But we were here together. Every morning I baked. Ellie helped roll the dough, sprinkle sugar, and cut cookie shapes. In the afternoons, she'd sit and draw. No more windowless houses. No more faceless men. Now it was flowers, cupcakes, a little girl with braids holding the hand of an old woman in an apron. One Tuesday afternoon, she came to me quietly, holding up a new drawing with both hands. She didn't say anything, just watched me as I took it. In the picture, she had drawn us, Ellie and Grandma, standing behind the bakery counter. The sun was shining through the window, lighting up the shelves of muffins and pies. Outside the window, there were flowers. Inside, we were smiling, but it was the writing that made my throat close. In bright purple crayon, she had written, "Grandma hears everything." I blinked. She waited. Then I smiled, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. "This is beautiful," I whispered. "Can I hang it up?" She nodded, her whole body lighting up. I found the perfect spot just above the counter, where every customer could see it. I taped it to the wall, smoothed the edges, and stood back. Ellie joined me, her tiny hand slipping into mine. We stood there in silence for a moment, the kind that feels full, not empty. That night, after dinner, as I washed dishes and Ellie read a picture book in her pajamas, I thought back to the woman I had been, the one crouched in the dark of a basement, trying to spell hope with blood. I thought of how close I had come to vanishing. I thought of how many people laughed when Ellie whispered the truth, and how many never bothered to listen. But I had. I always would, because that's what saved us. I dried my hands, kissed Ellie's forehead, and turned off the kitchen light. I used to be a ghost in my own home. Now I'm the woman Ellie runs to, the name she calls out when she's scared, the voice she trusts above all others. And on the wall above our oven, her drawing still hangs, a reminder not just of what we escaped, but of what we built together. Our first winter in Oregon came early. Snow dusted the sidewalks by Thanksgiving, and Ellie pressed her nose to the glass in the bakery every morning, waiting to see if it would stick. When it finally did, she ran outside in her mismatched boots, arms wide like she was ready to catch every snowflake by hand. I stood in the doorway with a towel, watching her spin and laugh. Really laugh. Not the polite giggles she used to force in that old house. Not the nervous smiles, but the kind of laugh that shakes through her ribs and lights up her cheeks. That was when I knew she was healing.
So was I.
Every Sunday, we had what we called candle mornings. I'd light a small white candle on the counter, not for anyone in particular, but for everything we had survived. Ellie would bring out her newest drawing, and we'd hang it next to the others. That wall was filling up fast. Sunsets, pie slices, a dog we didn't have, but she dreamed of. A picture of me on a rocking chair with her on my lap. And in almost every drawing, no matter what, she always added the same 3 words in the corner. Grandma hears everything. She said it was her reminder. I said it was my promise. By Christmas, the town had adopted us. People came not just for our warm cinnamon rolls or buttered scones, but to say hello to the strong old woman and her miracle girl. Some brought toys for Ellie. Others brought stories of their own. It seemed every town had a grandmother who once sat in silence. Every bakery had customers carrying heartbreak in paper bags. We never told the full story, but somehow they knew. One afternoon, a woman came in, gray hair, leather gloves, grief in her eyes. She pointed to the wall of Ellie's drawings and whispered, "That one there? It looks like me." I handed her a coffee and said, "It probably is." Ellie made a friend down the block, a girl named Jo with glasses too big for her face and a laugh that sounded like a hiccup. They played hopscotch and invented secret handshakes. One night after Jo went home, Ellie asked, "Do you think Jo knows?" "Knows what, sweetheart?" And I used to be scared all the time. I sat beside her, wiped flour off my hands. "I think Jo knows that you're brave. That's what matters." She thought for a moment. "Yeah, brave is better than scared." On the anniversary of the trial, I baked a single cupcake with pink frosting. Ellie placed one tiny candle in the center. We didn't call it anything. We didn't need to. She blew it out, smiled, and said, "Let's draw." That night's drawing was just 2 hearts, one big, one small, connected by a string. Spring came early that year. The bakery smelled like lemon bars and rising bread. Ellie helped me plant tulips in the window box. She had grown taller, stronger. She still had bad dreams sometimes.
So did I.
But we had built a world where those dreams didn't follow us past breakfast. One evening, as I tucked her in, she asked, "Grandma, will you be there forever?" I held her hand. "As long as I'm breathing, baby, and after that, I'll still be the voice in your heart that listens." She smiled. "Then I'll never be alone." I kissed her forehead, turned off the light, and whispered the same words I had told her that very first night when everything was broken and nothing made sense. "You're safe with Grandma always." And this time she believed it. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Some truths are whispered so quietly the world never hears them unless someone listens with their whole heart. Ellie whispered. They laughed. But I remembered every word. If you felt something while listening, if you've ever known the pain of being dismissed, the ache of watching someone suffer in silence, or the fire that burns inside when no one else will stand up, then you understand why I had to tell this. Because when no one believes the child or the grandmother, it takes just one voice to shatter the silence. Here on Grandma True Stories, that silence ends. So if you believe in justice not shouted but earned, if you believe in quiet revenge, in patient truth, and in the wisdom of women long ignored, subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where the quietest voice in the room finally speaks and the world listens. Because revenge has no expiration date.